Okay guys, we are ready to move on to painting our middle ground. So we've completed the foreground, which is in front, the background, which is in the back, and now we're ready to work on the middle ground, which is in the middle. So specifically, the house is in the middle ground. So we're gonna open this up so that our background and foreground are facing down and away from us. So this is what your or how your work should be set up. If you followed along with me, it should look pretty much exactly like this. If you came up with your own design, obviously it will look different, but your drawing for your middle ground design should be facing out to you, and foreground and background should be facing away. Okay, so I am going to reference our foreground and our background for a second and talk about the use of color moving forward. All right, so we talked about using warm colors in the foreground. And when I'm talking about the use of warm colors, again, it doesn't mean that I'm painting the bushes orange or red or yellow, but what it does mean is I'm working more yellow values or yellow into the colors as I'm making my greens or my browns. And then we talked about the use of cooler colors in the background. Now, of course, blue is a cool color, but what we're really talking about here is providing a blue value mixed in with our browns and our greens to help make the background recede or look farther away. Okay, so as we begin to look at the middle ground, occasionally, if this is standing up or it's flipped open like this, we do see a little bit of the middle ground with the bushes near the house and the little top of the path. So I want to use a value that is going to be different than the background and the foreground. So I'm going to be thinking about my choice of green for this part in my work. Okay, so as we started yesterday, we are going to start with our lighter colors first, and then we will work our way into darker colors. Now, because we don't have pages to flip between today, that means that we are going to have to be thoughtful and factor in some dry time for our painting. So let's go ahead and get started. I think I'll go ahead and start with my bushes and pathway perhaps today, and then work my way in to some of the areas. Let me think about that before I make my final decision. So I've activated my paints, they're ready to go. If I start with my bushes, then I'm not going to be able to paint anything that's touching them, and the bushes are pretty much running into everything else. But if I start with my grass or my pathway, then I could potentially work on other elements of the painting. So I'm going to revise what I initially said, that I was going to start with the bushes, and I'm not going to do that, because as I take my time and think about how can I use my time most wisely in my painting, I'm going to go ahead and start with either the grass or the roof or the house or the path, something that allows me to work in other areas as those areas are drying. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do the grass first. So I'm taking a look again at my foreground, and I see that I have a lot of yellow-green in the foreground, and in the background I have a lot of blue-green. So I'm going to go with more of that mid-tone value in this, but before I do that, I'm going to layer on my lighter colors first, which means I'm going to start with my yellow-green first, and then I'll layer color on top of that, just like you saw me do over here. Okay, so I'm going to open this up and get started. So I'm going to mix up my yellow-green. You should already know how to do this. I'm going to take my yellow, I'm going to mix it into the green I have here, so I'm not wasting this paint. I had it left over from yesterday, and I'm just going to add some yellow to it to mix up that yellow-green. And I'm not going to lay that on top of here because I would not accidentally want to get paint on those areas. Okay, so while that's drying, I'm going to shift my attention to the roof of the house. I'm going to be making that gray. And again, I already had some gray paint left in here from yesterday. So again, I'm not going to waste my paints. I'm just going to add some water, reactivate that gray. I'm going to use that to paint my roof today. Okay, so now I'm going to check and see if the bushes and the grass are dry. They don't feel super dry to me right now. So what I can do to use my time most wisely is I can either think about painting another section of the house. So I could come in and do the windows. I could do this rim on the chimney. I can do any of those things in my work right now. But I can't paint anything that's touching the bushes or the grass because they're still a little bit wet, and I can't do anything touching the roof because it's also wet. So what I'm going to do, I'm not 100% sure yet what I'm going to do for this value here. So I'm going to go ahead and let this dry for about 5 to 10 minutes, and then I'm going to come back and do my next bit of painting. Okay, so my grass and my bushes have dried, and now I can think about what I want to paint next. So I'm going to go ahead and paint the pathway. And as I begin to think about painting the pathway, I'm thinking about the fact that this is the color I ended with up here, right? So it's lighter towards the bottom. And now that, for me, what that means is I'm going to plan to use this value of brown as I start my pathway. And again, maybe it'll get lighter as it comes out, but I'm going to start with at least that value to begin with. So I'm going to go ahead and begin painting that. I'm just using water to pull the rest of that color out. Okay, so while I'm letting that dry, I'm going to think about what I'm going to work on next. Again, trying to make the best use of my time. Because when we are working with watercolors, we do have to allow for dry time. I'm also going to clean off any wet paint that I got in the area that I'm working so that I don't accidentally get it on my foreground or background. Okay, so I'm thinking about adding a little bit more yellow to the bushes, just in a few spots towards the top, here and there. And I am definitely going to blend that out a little bit, but I'm going to start just by popping some in the top of these bushes. And then again, like I said, I'm going to come back in and blend them out with some water. And I'll be going back in later with some other values of green. But I felt like I didn't get enough yellow, so I'm going back in and making that adjustment. Do be careful next to your path if you're doing some yellow on the bush down here. Be careful that you are not touching the wet brown paint. So you can do it as long as it's not touching there. Okay, so I'm going to let those areas dry, and I'm going to come up here and think again about what I'm going to do for my windows. I'm going to go ahead and start by painting them in gray, and I'm probably going to layer on some black and a little bit later. So you can also use that time where your work is drying to think about your next move, think about your colors, think about what you want it to look like. Sometimes we need to take some time to think about our work. It doesn't always come instantly to us. I'm using my brush to pick up some of that paint that's there in that box, that rectangle, and I'm using it in these other ones because it's pretty wet and there's quite a bit of paint, so I can just move it. Okay, I'm not going to do this one because I'm thinking that maybe the yellow there is still wet. So I'm going to go ahead and skip this one for now. And I'm going to come up here to my roof, the chimney I should say, on top of the roof. And I'm going to paint that edge. And I'm also going to come back in with my paint and add a darker value to this edge of the roof, so I want it to be darker than this side, because I imagine that there would be a shadow. Probably darken that even more, because it doesn't look that much darker than this side. So I'm going to go ahead and just some black paint and layer that over top. It's just a tiny amount, and then a damp brush. Not a super wet brush, just a damp one. And spread that out. I'm going to do the same thing with just a tiny amount of black, just like a little itty bit on the tip of my brush. Not a whole lot. Pressing that down gently so I can lay it flat. So when it starts curling up a little bit, it gets harder. Get the brush where you want it. Those are still pretty damp, so I'm going to go ahead and let those dry a little bit longer before I do anything else to the windows. I'm going to check here. The bushes are almost dry. Be careful because I just got a fingerprint on my painting by pressing it with my finger. So maybe not the best idea to be pressing your fingers on it. Might be better to just go ahead and let things dry. Try and be more patient than I am with this, okay? So the way I'm fixing that is I'm just taking a very just slightly damp paper towel or tissue and just touching that on top of the spots. And you're seeing it's lifting off the brown, but it's also going to lift off some of the green, which is fine because for this part of the painting, it doesn't really have a huge impact. Okay, so I'm gonna let that dry and I'm gonna come back and do the next step in my painting.